Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. On today's show, we'll be discussing an upcoming conference on Afghanistan in Geneva and India's dissolution of the Kashmir State Assembly. Now, the European Council is to hold another conference on Afghanistan on the 27th to 28th of November. This is at a time that insecurity remains a daily reality for Afghans, and the Taliban refuse to speak to the Kabul government. What role can Europe or the West play in resolving the quagmire it finds itself in Afghanistan? Joining us to discuss this conference further are Zubair Babakarkali, who is a journalist joining us live from the Afghan capital, Kabul, and we're also joined by Mr. Shah Mohamand, who is a diplomat and analyst, also joining us to discuss this further. Zubair, I'll start with you, if I may. What do you make of the possibilities that this conference coming up in Geneva present for Afghanistan?
I think there have been several conferences on Afghanistan in the last 16 years, and there have been so many discussions on how to bring peace into Afghanistan and how to make a peace deal between the Afghan government and the Taliban. But there wasn't a big change so far. But this Geneva conference, I think, is happening in a important time, because right now there are more chances ever than before for the peace talks and peace deal, because the U.S. itself is trying more to talk to the Taliban, to talk to the Pakistani officials, Afghan officials, and other countries to have discussions for peace in Afghanistan. So I think this is a very important time for the European countries to discuss the possibilities of peace in Afghanistan.
So Zubair, do you think this is all because of possibly Donald Trump coming into office in the White House? We know Trump has said, of course, that he will resolve, or he said he will try to resolve at least, the situation in Afghanistan vis-a-vis peace talks.
Yeah, I think so. After Donald Trump became a president, he had a new strategy for not only for Afghanistan but for the whole region. The top is the issue of Afghanistan, and I think now they have also realized that the Afghan war cannot be won with the military efforts. They cannot win it as long as many soldiers as they can, and that's the thing. And also, I think they have realized too, if they discuss with Pakistan and those Taliban officials who are jailed in Pakistan, if they are released, they can play a vital role. That's why recently Mullah Brother was released from the Pakistani jails, yeah, who was arrested when he tried to have to build connections with the Afghan government a few years back and have negotiations. So I think that all these, when we see the developments, it gives us hope that now this is the more suitable time for peace deal and peace talks.
Mr. Shah, if you can hear me, I just wanted to ask you, do you think that this is a good time, better than possibly in the past, for the Taliban to reach a peace deal with the United States and the Kabul government?
Well, I think there are a number of very obstacles. And, number one is the American agenda in the area. Whether and on what terms would they like to withdraw their forces? Because the withdrawal of American forces is by far the single most important condition consistently put forward by the Taliban for any meaningful negotiation. Whether they would agree, under what circumstances, for what period of time. And number two, the second obstacle is the Afghan government's reluctance to share power or to cede power and space to the Taliban at their expense. And number three, the lack of a clear vision within the Taliban outfit on what terms would they like to be mainstreamed in the electoral and administrative processes of Afghanistan. So these issues have to be resolved. I think China's role as a mediator would be very important, because China and Russia both now are coming closer to the Taliban for a variety of reasons. Because they believe that only a Taliban, a government that includes the Taliban, would stabilize Afghanistan to prevent the incursion of Daesh into Central Asia, into China.
Right.
And then, of course, is the opium factor, the heroin factor, which is finding its way into Russia and China because of the porous border and lack of security. So they have a very keen interest now in reinvigorating the peace process, which, of course, the Americans wouldn't like. So there are the issue is, I think, quite complex.
Okay.
But
if you just allow me, Mr. Rustam Shah, I wanted to break down what you just said, because you made some very pertinent points, which I wanted to put to our other guest, Zubair. Zubair, I wanted to ask you then, what do you make of the American agenda as Mr. Rustam Shah there described? Do you think that the Americans will take a backseat, if I may use that term really, in this case? Or do you think the Americans want to take still control of this situation and not hand it over to the likes of the Russians and the Chinese, etc.?
Yeah, I think the U.S. wants to have a solution into the Afghanistan conflict. I don't think they want to just leave Afghanistan in such a situation. That, of course, we know that no one has won the war yet, but if the U.S. leaves, that will definitely mean the Taliban won the war, and the U.S. doesn't want that. Right now, I think they only see a solution in the peace talks for.
Okay, it seems we may have lost our connection there with Zubair for a moment. Mr. Rustam Shah, I'll come back to you, because the point that you made about the U.S. forces and, of course, the Chinese and the Russians also getting involved, how do you think all of that will really play out? Because as Zubair there said as well, and as we know, the Americans will not step back without a fight, possibly. What do you think that this then means for Afghanistan going forward?
Well, the point is that the Americans are worried about, they're worried about a very increasing role for China, both military role and economic role, if they withdraw their forces completely. Because they believe that then the region will be open to more and more Chinese incursions, Chinese domination, and China would emerge as a regional superpower, maybe at the expense of American interests in the area. That's a very important consideration for America. But these divergences, I think, can be resolved if the Americans take a long-term view. Because a time might come when the Taliban could emerge as strategic partners and supporters of America. Vietnam today is an ally of America against China. So these things could happen, but it requires hard work, sustained negotiations, and very clearly laid down terms and conditions. The Taliban have to make their position very clear on a number of issues. The Afghan government have to be convinced that the parliament and constitution of the country is sacrosanct, but the unity and integrity of Afghanistan is more sacrosanct. And if they have to cede some territory at their own expense for the sake of Afghanistan, that has to be done. I think Turkey, China would play a very important role, maybe Pakistan also, and some other regional countries, to bring pressure to bear upon the Americans to announce in clear terms on what terms and over what period of time would they be willing to withdraw their forces should an agreement be reached between the Taliban and the Afghan government in Kabul.
Okay, let me put that point then to Zubair, because Zubair, here we're talking about, as Mr. Rustam Shah there said, a withdrawal of American forces possibly in the future at some point. That is, of course, something that the Taliban have very clearly demanded for any proper peace to be brought into the country. Do you think that that is likely to happen, A, Zubair? And secondly, the role of these regional countries as described by Mr. Rustam Shah, certainly we cannot ignore the role that these countries play, can we?
I think the U.S. forces won't withdraw till even after if there is a peace deal, because the next step will be, the next argument will be that the U.S. official will tell Taliban, okay, if you reconcile, if you join the government, there still will be the problem of ISIS in Afghanistan, and we need to have some forces in Afghanistan. That might happen. And after that, if there is the issue with the ISIS is also finished or they are kicked back, I think the U.S. wants some bases in Afghanistan for longer term. If we see to the other countries, especially like nearly the neighboring countries near Afghanistan, it's Japan. They have bases over there. I think to follow their own global agendas in the world, I think U.S. wants some bases in Afghanistan because they got kind of competitions with China and India economically. So I think they will try to remain in Afghanistan, but not interfering in any issues of Afghanistan.
But Zubair, to be fair, can the Americans be trusted, if I ask you bluntly? Because I imagine many Afghans would say the Americans can't be trusted. And why should they allow the Americans to remain in their country, especially since a lot of them, I imagine, would say that they've had such a negative experience throughout this invasion or war or whatever we want to call it?
Yeah, I believe, I agree that none of the U.S. soldiers had good experience in Afghanistan, and everyone, I think, wants to complete their term and go back to their country. I think it's mostly the longer strategies of America for Asia, maybe, or when it comes to their competitions with other big countries. So that's what I think they want to have their presence, at least in Afghanistan. I think if there is a deal with the Taliban and the Taliban agrees to that, I don't think Afghans would mind that, because we know Afghanistan was suffering during the Civil War, and then from 1996 to 2002, Afghanistan was completely ignored and forgotten by the world, especially by America, and that's why Afghans were so frustrated. They wanted to get rid from the Taliban. The regime that they had that time was too strict, and Afghans were hopeless to get rid of such situation. But it was the U.S. who intervened, and with making the excuse of fighting the terrorism, they helped Afghans get rid of the Taliban. So I think they still welcome those efforts by the U.S. And after that, the rebuilding that happened in Afghanistan, and the education and health that improved. So I think Afghans still wants the U.S. to help.
Okay, so Rustam Shah, I wonder what you make of that. Do you think that the Afghans appreciate what the Americans did for them? Certainly, we know that the Taliban, there have been attacks on innocent Afghans throughout these years. But do you think that the Afghan position on America's involvement is a positive one?
Well, the last 16, 17 years of experience of destruction, of devastation, of killing and death and decimation of villages, I think is enough to convey a very clear message and lesson. And I think the people of Afghanistan are now sick and tired of all this now.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think ISIS should not be a concern for Americans. It's a concern for Chinese and Russians, because they have borders with Afghanistan, Central Asia, and then Russia, and the Chinese have a border with Afghanistan. So it's more of a threat to China and Russia, and it doesn't pose any American interest in the region at all. So the Americans should not be worried about Daesh. The Chinese and Russians should be worried about Daesh. Afghanistan should be worried about Daesh. Pakistan should be worried about Daesh. So I think that a convergence of perceptions could be possible, but some concessions, some give and take have to take place amongst all three parties: Taliban, the Afghan government, and the American. Because the situation is no longer sustainable. The insurgency is escalating. More and more areas are coming into its control. The Afghan government forces, 7, 8, 9% of people are leaving the army.
Yeah.
The defection rate is alarming. The people are losing motivation to fight for the government. Lawlessness is now sweeping across the country. Insecurity, lawlessness, violence, and the 45% of unemployment, and the economy. So I think it's time now that some new formula with bigger in vitality and the support of the regional countries must be launched. Some roadmap must be now clearly delineated for the Afghans to go forward. Because this situation, as I said, is no longer sustainable, economically, politically, and militarily. And there is no military solution at all. There are no gainers and no winners, clear winners. I think the people of Afghanistan are losing. No one is winning.
Right, so that's a good point, isn't it, Zubair? That obviously the people of Afghanistan are not winning in this situation. I'm sure you would agree with that statement, but do you feel that, yes, the regional countries, and especially the bordering countries, as Mr. Rustam Shah there mentioned, China and Russia especially, and Pakistan possibly, and others, should play a greater role because they have a greater stake in this situation, don't they? They do want secure borders, of course, with Afghanistan, and secondly, they want a stable Afghanistan. Why not give them the reins in this situation to take this peace process forward?
Just the word of mouth so far. Every country said, we want Afghanistan secure, to have secure environment in our country. But mostly it didn't happen, like something didn't happen in real. If we say Pakistan, of course, the Pakistani Prime Minister and Pakistani other leaders always said the same thing, that we want to play a big role in peace building of Afghanistan, but nothing happened in real, and we have seen that as U.S. President Trump also said last week in his tweet that Osama was killed in Pakistan, and the whole world was chasing Osama where he could be. So that's starting from that. I mean, no one is honestly helping the peace process in Afghanistan. Everyone is looking for their own goals and agendas, following their own agendas. That's the problem. I think even the Americans, they are not honestly trying to solve the Afghanistan's issue. They also have their own interests in this. So I think if China, Pakistan, India, and Russia, they get together and just work on peace building, we would not need even Europeans and Geneva conferences or like the U.S. to solve this problem, I think.
Zubair, if I may push you on that point, because you brought it up, the issue of Pakistan in this specific case, isn't it important, Zubair, though, to mention the sacrifices that Pakistan has made, that the corridor that Pakistan has provided for Americans to be able to supply their troops, and obviously Pakistan didn't start this entire war in Afghanistan to begin with. This really all goes back to a decision that the United States made, doesn't it, Zubair?
Yeah, definitely. The United States, during all this war, they spent a lot of money, they gave a lot of sacrifice, they got many of their soldiers killed, but they were not looking into the ground realities. They of course pushed back Taliban from Afghanistan, and in the first years like 2003 and 2004, They totally believe that Taliban are defeated, but they have those technologies and those options to use them and see where the Taliban went. Where did the Taliban go? Where are they living now? In 2004, the Taliban Leadership Council gave a message to the U.S. officials from Karachi that they want to negotiate. They were in Karachi. They knew where they are. The first problem is that they didn't accept that request. They didn't negotiate. And the second big mistake is that they ignored them being in Pakistan. And they didn't talk to the Pakistani official about that. So the whole thing is a mix-up, I think. It's like in Afghanistan, we say putting dirt in someone's eyes. You see everything happening. You are bringing your logistics into Afghanistan via Pakistan, paying Pakistan the money, and then you have your own enemy out there. What does it mean? So the whole thing is a very complicated issue, I think.
Why do you think that opportunities were missed by the Americans? Do you think that the Americans thought that this would be militarily won?
Yeah, definitely. They totally thought, oh, we already won the war by 2004, rejecting the request of the Taliban leadership from Karachi to negotiate and to talk and to reconcile. Once they rejected that request, after that, there was definitely a chance for the Taliban because they only had to fight. They only had one option, and plus the support they were getting and the promises they were getting from various circles and intelligence groups. That's why they started the war. Other than that, I don't think they could have started the war, the fight against the Afghan government and Americans. And that was like the best chance. I remember in 2009, I was helping an American author writing a book about Afghanistan and that why this war went wrong and it became a failure. And the most important reason was that the Americans were completely sure that they have defeated the Taliban and they have won the war even by 2004.
Right.
But all the problems started after that and after they rejected negotiating with the Taliban.
So I'm wondering then now when we look at the promises that have been made in many of these conferences that we've spoken about, Zubair, one of the promises is that Afghanistan by 2024 will be self-reliant in all fashions. That's what was decided upon in 2011 in Bonn. Do you think that's a realistic goal?
I don't think so. I think there is still a long way to go that Afghanistan can be self-sufficient and self-reliant. We still have a lot of problems. There was huge rebuilding in the infrastructure of Afghanistan. We got so many school buildings and clinics and hospitals. By 2002, there was no private college, no private clinic in Afghanistan. Right now, there are so many everywhere around the country, but Afghanistan is not self-sufficient economically yet. I don't think they can even pay half of the funds for the Afghan security forces. All the security forces are funded. Their salaries, their logistics, they are paid by the U.S. government. So I don't think in a few years Afghanistan will be able to achieve that goal.
And then as a final point, Zubair, before we end this segment, I wanted to ask you, the Taliban obviously have a track record in Afghanistan, even before the American involvement there. Do you think that the Afghan people themselves would be happy with any power-sharing government, which includes any former, if we may call them that at this point, Taliban officials?
I think so. Afghans are really, really tired of war and this bloodshed. They just want peace in the country. If there is a peace deal, if anyone is ruling the country, if anyone is like the leader, they don't care. If there is election, they will go out and vote. If someone is chosen for the interim government as a leader, Afghans won't mind that. The only thing Afghans want is peace.
Okay. Okay, Zubair, we'll leave it there at that. We, of course, appreciate you taking your time out to share your thoughts with us. That was Zubair Babakarkali speaking to us live from Kabul. He's a journalist. We were also joined by Mr. Shah Mohamand, who is a diplomat and analyst, and he had been sharing his thoughts with us, and we, of course, appreciate his time and sharing his insight. As we discussed in this segment, it's important to obviously talk about the fact that there have been many such conferences, as we spoke about Afghanistan, all the way since the U.S. invasion even began in 2001. So what have these conferences really achieved? What is the American role going forward? Will America be able to step away from Afghanistan, possibly in favor of the regional countries such as China and Russia having more of a role in this situation? We'll have to wait and see how all of that plays out, as well as, of course, what the Afghan people themselves want. Stay tuned, though. A lot more to come. We'll be back after a short break.